I think you're gonna have a terrific time.
Well, keep hyping me up as we get closer.
No, I'm telling you, you can't bitch out. You're just being a bitch.
Welcome to Backtracking, the show where three old friends take a second listen to classic bands, influential albums, track by track. I am J. William Hall.
And I'm Dan Fiden. We'll be taking this journey together, providing context, both personal and historical, on some legendary bands. For our third season, we've selected 15 of our favorite albums that we think deserve a good old-fashioned backtracking.
A good old-fashioned backtracking. Backtracking's the greatest podcast. Laughing JW and Dan with this podcast every week. Backtracking's the greatest podcast. Getting ready for podcast action.
And J. William Hall, today, it is yet another special backtracking interview.
We're going to ask all of the hard-hitting questions that are going to make people uncomfortable.
Yeah, we want to put them on the spot. We want to
We want them to answer for their sins.
Yeah.
And we're going to shine that white-hot spotlight on them.
Yeah.
And see what they have to say for themselves.
I'm going to interrupt them a lot. I'm going to say, like, in the middle of a question, or I'm going to ask, and then they're going to start answering, and then I'm just going to be like, yeah. And then they're going to be...
I'm going to put words in their mouth.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, so what you mean is... you know, and see how they respond.
No, we're not going to do any of that, Jay William.
We won't.
What we're going to do is we are going to talk to an absolutely delightful writer. His name is Will Hodgkinson. He is the head music critic at the Times of London.
Right.
And not only that,
the podcast is now huge.
Yeah.
With the critics.
People
in
are like,
the UK.
What continent is backtracking not on? And I say, there is no continent we're not on. We are on all the continents.
We go everywhere, even Antarctica.
That's right. But Will Hodgkinson wrote an absolutely wonderful book called Street Level Superstar, and it is about Lawrence. Lawrence, the mastermind behind Felt, creators of the album we have just backtracked. That album, of course, is called Forever Breathes the Lonely Word. But not only Felt. He did Denim. He did Go-Kart Mozart. He did Mozart Estate. What else has he done, Jay William? Anything?
I think you just listed
those are all bands, by the way.
His primary musical projects.
Yeah, he's done it all. And Will's written a book. It was an award-winning book. Just came out last year, I believe. I've read it. It's terrific. And
it's not a memoir. It's a year spent with Lawrence, hanging out with him, going places with him, sort of painting a portrait of him.
Yeah. And Jay William, you know how much of a nut I am about kind of rock band biographies.
Right.
I will read any music band bio that I can get my hands on. I felt like this one was really unique because of the fact that it was this kind of very one-on-one, book-long, essentially year-long interview, right? And it gives you a really good, interesting sense of this, undeniably strange, eccentric, but kind of wonderful character that is Lawrence, in a way that, reading interviews, reading kind of these third-hand, anecdotes, gives you glimpses into, but the book really, I think, immerses you in it in a great way. It's an extremely funny book. It's a great read. So I definitely recommend that first, you listen to our terrific interview.
Right.
Second, you get the book and you read it, right?
Maybe, first you listen to the episodes where we talk about the album.
That's right. Okay.
Second, you listen to the interview. Third, you go to a bookstore and get that book.
That's right. But then you should be listening to the Felt album, Forever Breathes the Lonely Word. So you're going to have to figure out where in that sequence of events that Jay William just described, you want to fit that in. Maybe you just make it the soundtrack to all of those activities.
Yeah, just have it going in the background. You
Yeah.
know, put in your earbuds. And,
Yeah.
away you go.
I like it. All right, so listen, without any further, there's been so much ado, no further ado. Will Hodgkinson, let's do it.
Seven brothers on their way from Avalon. Seven sisters shooting skyways for the sun. Homer's Iliad lay burning in the fire. And I was pleased just then till you said that the sun will never shine.
All right, dear listeners of Backtracking, we're here with a very special episode. We have another interview, a backtracking interview, this time with author Will Hodgkinson, who is a journalist and author, the chief rock and pop critic for the Times newspaper in the UK. You've written for many other publications as well, and the thing we want to talk with you about is a book that you wrote that came out in 2024 called Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence, Lawrence being the leader of the band Felt, whose album, Forever Breathes the Lonely Word, is an album that Dan and I just did a thorough backtracking of. So this is meant to be sort of like an appendix onto that episode. So thank you for being here, Will.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for writing this book, Will. I have to say, it took me about a month and a half to get it to Hawaii, but it is a fantastic and fantastically funny, kind of insightful book. And for me, someone who had no idea that Lawrence or Felt existed at all prior to JW selecting it as one of his 5 best underrated albums of all time. I feel like I've fallen down the rabbit hole into a very strange and kind of fascinating world.
So it's definitely a strange world. Yeah, it's well, thank you very much. So I would say that when I was a kid, I was just missed out on Felt. They were a little bit before me, but there would be one of those bands that when you go around to someone's house and they've got like an cool older brother or an older sister or whatever, and you look through their records and you see the ones you don't know. And I remember seeing a Felt album called Let the Snakes Crinkle Their Heads to Death, which was later renamed the 17th Century, and it had this picture of this strange fellow with a sort of a headband on, which is obviously designed to kind of make up for any sort of loss of hair. And I didn't really know anything about him or the band. Later found out it was Lawrence. And skip forward many, many years, and I met him really at his lowest peak about 20 years ago, when he'd had drug problems and he was being made homeless, and really, his life was falling apart. And then to get right to the present, I got to know him. He's in a much better state now, but he's a very, very eccentric character. And we talked about the idea of doing a book, and I was thinking, I knew how difficult he was, but how brilliant too. And I was thinking, do I want to do this? And we had a meeting with the publisher, and Lawrence, the first thing he said was, yeah, so I want you to write a book, but I don't want you to write about anything that happened before this year. And I'm like, right, so no mention of Felt, no mention of Denim, no mention of basically anything whatsoever, apart from what nonsense you're going to tell me. Well, no. So we came to a sort of agreement that I'd follow him around and go on these walks with him, which is how he spends his time. He's only got an old Nokia phone. He has no access to the internet. He doesn't use all the things that we all use now, like maps or whatever. And he just wanders about. And I realized that this was a guy who, in his head, he really is a star. In his mind, as he walks down the street, he's imagining himself in a movie. But at the same time, because he's never had any money, and because he's never been able to elevate himself in the way that stars can and detach themselves from the world, he's in the world. you know. So it'd be like the kids at the bus stop would be laughing at him because he looks weird, and we'd go into shops and they thought he was going to steal things because he looks like a junkie. And I just thought this is just fascinating. And so then, I mean, I knew Felt by then, obviously, but I've kind of gone back and I've listened to all these albums, especially Forever Breathes, with a new sort of light of this man I know very well, because you first hear them, they're very poetic and beautiful, and then I know, what he's really like. And so yeah, I can kind of I can hear the lines now in a fresh new light, I suppose.
Does it make it makes the albums hit differently? Like, does it hit deeper because you know him better, and you can kind of drill down into those lyrics and some of the lines that, I mean, to our ears, I think the interesting thing, or another layer of interest for us, is that, being from the States, like, he is this very, very British, eccentric, like, has made barely a ripple here as far as we can tell. I mean, Dan and I are both music heads, like, we've, been into music since we were kids, and I was into a ton of British bands, and things on Creation and all of that stuff somehow felt like did not enter my radar at all until I was an adult and somebody introduced me to them, and I was like, how did I miss this band? But it's like the Lawrence aspect of it just it adds layers to the onion of the whole thing, and I think you're right, at least for me, like, reading parts of your book and like reading these interviews and whatever you can find on Lawrence, he's just this fascinating character, and it does add, for me, like, depth to the lyrics.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, okay, so I can have now knowing him, I can look at some of these lyrics. If you look at Reign of Crystal Spires, it's got these rather kind of fantastical sort of imagery lyrics, sort of seven brothers on their way from Avalon, seven sisters shooting skyways from the sun. Homer's Iliad lay burning by the fire. Well, I can guarantee you he has definitely never read or probably never opened Homer's Iliad, but that doesn't matter. What he has done,
right? That the impression I got was that he was an expert at Homer's Iliad.
Oh no, oh no, he's very good. I mean, now he was because he's a big contrarian at the moment. He loves telling all he loves going on about how he hates indie music, and someone says, "Who's your favorite artist?" He goes, "Oh, I love Taylor Swift." And he goes, "That album she made, the Dead Poets Department," gets the name wrong. He said, "It's just a masterpiece." And it's like, "Oh right, what's your favorite song?" He went, the one about the bloke." He's got absolutely no idea. But that's all part of it. That's part of his charm. So what I would say, so that song is, prime example. When he was a kid, and he's a working class guy from a little outside Birmingham. Birmingham is a pretty industrial city. He's from a village, really, or a suburb. And he was bored as hell, and he discovered Tolkien as a kid, and he absolutely loved Tolkien. And so he liked those sort of fantasy books. But he knew by the time he was in an indie band, an underground band, that there's kind of, they're not the references that you're meant to have. The underground don't sing about hobbits.
Depends on the kind of indie band, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I guess you're right. So he would, I know where that came from. That would have come from him, his those early influences. And the other thing about Lawrence is that he's a very charming guy, but he cannot have relationships. When he was younger, he was really good looking, and he was in a cool band, and he had lots of girls interested in him. But I can see lyrics throughout this whole album, and in later albums, there's a song called "I Can't Make Love to You Anymore." That is Lawrence. He always has this idea of the perfect girl he's in love with, but they can never match up to the vision in his head. They're just people. So if you take that song "Grey Streets," it says, "You're attracted to me because my face smiled down from a wall." It's unlikely that his face did smile down from a wall. I don't think anyone was making posters of him.
Yeah.
But in his mind, he's the star, and here's this person. I think I know who he's singing about. I'm not sure, but I think there's a girlfriend called Angels Bronson's who contacted him, who was Spanish, and he had a great romance with her, which all went wrong because he wouldn't eat any Spanish food or any food at all, actually. So it all went horribly wrong, like it always does. But these are the themes I keep coming up with this kind of one side fantasy, romance, poetry, like imagination, angels, and flying. Like in Primitive Painters, which is on the previously, he's talking about angels and sort of dragons flying and this kind of thing.
A lot of it reminds me of like British romantic poetry of the 1800s,
Yes.
like that kind of like imagery and style, and to my ears that was like, wow, like you like, I can't think of other contemporary songwriters who kind of use those types of images in their songs. I'm sure there were, but
yeah, no, I can't. And the interesting thing is that he'll combine that with really direct lines, about how unhappy he is, or on a wave crashed on the rocks, you ruined it all. There's always his bitterness comes out. Whatever he's feeling. There's another one. I mean, this is classic. So, gather up your wings and fly. It's an amazing song.
Yeah.
And then, it sounds all romantic. And then there's that line, what's the betting you'll be letting your hands dip into, you'll be letting your hands dip into his loins. This is a man with a terror of sex, but also kind of, that's jealousy, isn't it? He's imagining his girlfriend being unfaithful. And that comes in amidst all this kind of very florid stuff. So, yeah, the funny thing about Lawrence, if you meet him, and he's, for all of his kind of poetic, it seems like he might be pretentious, but he's really not. He's very, very down to earth. He's very real to his own vision of life. He'd love to be pretentious, but he can't be. He's just too real. So, when I listen to Felt, I hear someone who's trying to be poetic, and he's a true artist. He really is. He really, whatever is inside him comes out into the music, and the lyrics. But, so he's trying to be poetic, but at the same time, he can't help but just be governed by all these feelings he's got of, feeling a bit bitter. Why haven't I made it? Or, this girlfriend I've got, why isn't she as good as I want her to be? All these kind of human failings. And that's why the music's so magical, because you can hear that.
In your interactions with Lawrence, I'm curious if you're ever able to have a conversation where he has kind of a practical retrospective of his own career. Is he able to kind of look back at Felt and say, that was when we did our best work? Or with Denim, like, I really think that album was great, but then we kind of, or is he always kind of in this mode where the thing I am doing next is the only thing that matters, which is a little bit of the sense that I get from the book.
There's an element of that, but he doesn't like looking back in a way. That's again like the Taylor Swift thing, she's the pop star at the moment, so I'll like her, and she's successful. He's obsessed with success as well. But I think also he is aware, actually. He knows when he got it right, and he knows when he got it wrong, and he'll say things like, I remember him early on saying, we got it wrong with Felt because when he say we, he meant bands like other indie bands like the Jesus and Mary Chain and the Weather Prophets and these bands who were around at the time in Britain. We all wanted to be the Velvet Underground, but you can't be the Velvet Underground because we're not from New York in the 60s. We don't know Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
So he sort of saw that. He knows that this is a fantastic album. But there's tiny little details which will drive him crazy. And so other people will love something and he'll absolutely hate it. Primitive Painters is a prime example. He decided there was something wrong with Robin Guthrie of the Cocteau Twins wanted to produce it, and he decided, even though it's fantastic and everyone loved it, there's something that I can't remember what it was, but it's something incredibly minor, like the use of a percussion or something, which meant it was terrible. Even though everyone loves that song, that's Lawrence. Some tiny little detail, but no, he does have an awareness. He also has an awareness of why he never made it, and it comes down to details. You guys are familiar with John Peel, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so he says Felt didn't make it for one simple reason. John Peel didn't like us. And the reason John Peel didn't like him is that when he started when he was 17, he made a single called Index, which he recorded in his bedroom. He sent 2 copies to John Peel, and then it wasn't played. And he sent a letter to John Peel demanding the return of both records. Now, no one has ever done this in the history of John Peel as the most famous alternative DJ in Britain. And John Peel later said I think it was in his memoirs, he said it was the nastiest, most vitriolic letter I've ever received in my life. So that's Lawrence starting his career at 17. Yeah. Classic.
Yeah.
You know, he wants everything, but he'll do something to shoot it down.
But he kind of I mean, it's an extreme view to be like, that's the only reason why Felt didn't make it. But he kind of has a point too, right? Because like, John Peel was like a super influential tastemaker, and if he liked you, then you were guaranteed some level of success, you know?
That's definitely true. And, I was speaking to my wife about it, and she grew up in Cornwall, which is a very rural part of Britain. And she said John Peel was the only way as a child to hear this music. So she had never heard of Felt, and it was so he was right. But of course, there was more things than that. I mean, he does have he denies it, but he's got an amazing propensity for self-sabotage. I think it's around the time this album was released, and they've got really good reviews. And it was on Creation Records, and Alan McGee of Creation Records was hoping to find a major label to get behind it, because he thought there's real hope for this band. And he did a showcase concert, and all the record labels turned up, which is amazing in itself. He was Felt with the hot band. This is 1986, I think. And Lawrence decided it would be a good idea. Bear in mind, at this stage, he'd never really taken drugs. He thought it'd be a good idea to take LSD before going on stage. He got on stage. He said, the first thing he said was, "Why are you all looking at me?" And then he told everyone to turn around and face the wall. And when they refused to do that, he said, "Right, go and get your money from the guy at the back. Go and ask for your money back, because I'm not playing a note." So pandemonium ensued, and all the record labels weren't going to go near him. And that's the kind of thing that he'd do. It's almost like, because I do think he's incredibly talented, and very charismatic character, which is what you need. So it's like, okay, you're a star. But my theory is, unconsciously, he knows that he couldn't handle the loss of control and the compromise that being a really famous person brings. He knows that, when the record label would say, "Okay, we need you to do a duet with Tina Turner," or whatever, he was never going to do it. I think there's an element of that. I mean, or even on a kind of indie underground level, he should have been up there with, well, like a Sonic Youth or Jesus and Mary Chain or Dinosaur Jr. or any of those great bands. Who are really well known, aren't they? People know who those bands are, but they don't know Felt. So I feel there is a self-sabotage, and I think it's a kind of, actually, he needs to control his world and keep it small.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, on the one hand, he craves this success, he craves this fame, but it's a fantastical version of what that would be. It's the thing in his head, and he knows maybe on some level that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, and I think you exactly. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. It's what it is. His idea was, when he said it to me in the book. He said that, when he was a kid, he saw Mark Bolan and T-Rex on Top of the Pops, which is our big TV show, which everybody would watch. And he said, that's a pop star. That's the greatest pop star ever.
Yeah.
And in his mind, he wants to be like like a kid. It's a bit like reading a comic and reading about superheroes. We know they're not real, and pop stars are the same. So in a way, I think there was an element of that. But at the same time, I mean, the other day we did a talk in Birmingham, and a bunch of his old school friends came along. And Lawrence is really, really eccentric. I mean, he took the door of his bathroom off so nobody could use it. He doesn't have any furniture in his he doesn't sleep on a bed. He sort of sleeps on the floor or whatever, or doesn't sleep. He's so obsessive with all these different things. He's really eccentric.
Yeah.
And there's that line in one of the songs where he says about sort of choosing to be in. He says, yes, all the people was it All the People That I Love Are Dead,
Yeah, yeah.
that one. Maybe I should entertain the very fact that I'm insane. I feel, because when we did the talk, I met these old school friends of his, and I said, "What was he
Yeah.
like as a kid?" And they said, "Oh, he was great. He was really good fun." I think he sort of chose to alienate himself from sanity in a way. It's like I'm an artist. I'm going to throw myself towards yeah, to throw myself towards insanity in a way, and he paid a high price for it. But I think there is an element of that with Lawrence.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's something that's almost sort of like holy, and coming from my
Monkish.
perspective, where it's like,
Yeah.
he's like a monk. He dedicated his life to his art, and
Yes.
that has cost him his sanity. That's cost him relationships. That's cost him a decent living. But to see somebody do that, there's something like weirdly just impressive and fascinating about it, and I don't know, like, because I mean, we all know that on some level, like, pop stars and other folks, like, when they're out of camera range, they're a different person, or they're like, they're pretty normal, like, most of the time. But like Lawrence was like, no, like, my my whole existence is going to be wrapped up in this sort of like fantastical world that I want to inhabit, and
Totally true.
it's
But
impressive,
when JW introduced me, again, I had never heard of the band at all. And when he started to explain to me who Lawrence was, I was trying to kind of place him within kind of the genre of outsider indie music artists in the US, right? And so I was kind of trying to center him. I was like, is he more like a Daniel Johnston or Mark Eitzel? We just did 52 episodes on American Music Club. And we got to talking, and one of the questions that I had, and I'd love to, in a sensitive way, ask you, how much of this do you think is earnest and how much is artifice? How much is he playing the role of this person that he's kind of built in his mind? Or is this really just genuinely his behavior? Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. My answer is, I think it started off as a kind of artifice,
Yeah.
but he's inhabited this role for so long now that he really is deeply he's
Yeah.
on the edge of sanity. I
Yeah.
mean, and I kind of forget, because a couple of weeks ago, he was meant to meet me, and as is often the case, he didn't turn up. He made some excuse, and then I was on the top of a bus, double-decker bus we have in
Yeah.
London, and I saw him walking down the street, shuffling along with these two carrier bags, which he always carries, which are just full of cardboard and nonsense. I've looked inside them, and I thought, oh my God, you really do look completely mad.
Yeah.
He really did look mad, and it's not artifice. It's more that there's been a very high, like you said, there's been a very high price to pay for the life he's chosen. And I think it's worth bearing in mind. I mean, Felt were a going concern.
Yeah.
They played gigs, they toured. Okay, they didn't make much money, but they had respect. They were thought well of and everything. And then he did Denim, and Denim was going to be the big pop
Yeah.
breakout. It was a fantasy of the 1970s, and it was just before Britpop. It kind of chimed with the ideas, a bit ahead of his time, as he always is. And it's a famous story. Later on, Denim were going to make it with a song called Summer Smash, and it was Summer Smash. It was on Radio One, which is the big station here. It's single of the week, and it was going to be released on the Monday. On the Sunday, Princess Diana died. Summer Smash.
Oh.
The record label decided to melt down all the copies, and he had a breakdown. It was his moment, and he had a true breakdown. And after a while, he got heavily into hard drugs. But I think it was never like those bands who it's all part of the lifestyle. Being a bit like Keith Richards. There's maybe an element of that because of his worship of Lou Reed, but I think really he was self-medicating because his life had gone so badly wrong. His dreams had fallen apart. And, then after that, there's a few years later, he's made homeless. So that really is going to brutalize someone. And since then, he's been building his life back up, but he's got endless rituals. I mean, this is an example of how it's not artifice. When we're doing the talk in Birmingham, which was a couple of weeks ago, just before we're about to start, for some reason, there's a packed crowd because it's a homecoming thing. For some reason, he decided he had to get some double-sided sticky tape, sellotape. And it's like, Lawrence, we're on now. Why? Oh no, I can't do it without my sticky tape. And it's like, what do you need it for? And he said, oh, I'm going to make my scrapbook later on this evening. So, yes, we're going on stage. Why do you need it now? He said, oh, because the shops will be shut later. I've got to get it now. And, so actually what was happening, he was nervous. And he found a completely random thing to obsess over. And that's what he does all the time. He's always obsessing over some tiny, tiny thing. And if it's not right, he can be the most charming person in the world and he can be an absolute nightmare. And a lot of it comes down to some little thing which upsets his equilibrium and he just can't cope,
Yeah.
And I've seen it time and again, where it could be just a little remark that someone's made or something, and he'll just fly off the handle. It's like he can't control his own emotions. So that is definitely not artifice. That's a very eccentric person trying to deal with life. And I think it goes both ways. Yeah, he embraced the life of the artist, no question. And decided to be bohemian. He worshipped Jack Kerouac and all those writers, beat writers. But at the same time, the fact that he's so unusual, genuinely unusual, means that he can create art which is not like anyone else.
Yeah.
And it's really without artifice because it's, or at least without pretension, because he thinks it's like, he thinks this stuff's commercial. He had a song. He was talking about this is while we're doing the book. He said, "Oh, I can't believe it. Our new single I've just been told that the radio won't play it." I said, "What's it called?" "I Want to Murder You." Like, I wonder why.
Yeah. So I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit about Felt in particular and their influence on later bands. Is this a band that within kind of, there have been things written about, how influential they are on kind of Britpop writ large, but within kind of the UK indie music scene and that, small family tree, how important do you think they've been and in your kind of travels with other more well-known musicians, of which you've had many? How often does Felt come up, or if ever?
I've been really surprised at how many people have been fans of Felt. For example, Primal Scream. I knew Bobby Gillespie was friends with Lawrence, so I knew that he'd said how much he loved Felt. Bell and Sebastian, I knew that they loved Felt. And then there's some surprising people. I think Noel Gallagher once talked about Lawrence as this kind of, because Oasis were on Creation.
Yeah.
And he was always disparaging all the Creation bands, saying, well, they had no ambition and we came along and we were going to have loads of ambition. But at the same time, he wanted to be on that label. He knew they were cool,
Yeah.
So I think I've got a feeling that Noel Gallagher has mentioned them. The strangest one who hadn't heard of Felt, I did an interview with Pete Townsend, and he had very happily for me, he'd heard about the book and he'd read it, and I was meant to be interviewing him about his latest project. All he could talk about was Lawrence.
Yeah.
He was fascinated, and he was going, "Oh, I read the book, and I just think I wish I was more like Lawrence." I was like, "Are you crazy?"
So did you get a sense of in what way he meant? What was the thing about it?
He did, because Pete Townsend was successful very young. The Who were massive. They continued to be one of the greatest bands of all time. He feels a terrible responsibility because when the Who go on tour, that's like 50 people employed, 100 people employed. And he feels that he has to keep it all going. And he reads about this guy who absolutely refused to compromise. And so Pete Townsend, who's a very artistic figure, is thinking, God, imagine being like that. But
Yeah.
of course, Pete was successful young, and so success breeds material comforts young. So he never really had to suffer
Yeah.
certainly not in terms of poverty in the way that Lawrence has. But I can kind of see the romance of it. It's the idea of the artist who just doesn't compromise and doesn't care. Other people can do things for him. He's just not going to, if he doesn't want to, I don't know, if someone does him a massive favor and then they ask for a favor back, if he doesn't want to do it, he won't. He doesn't have that sense, although he's actually a very, can be a very thoughtful person. If he's a one-track mind guy, do you know what I mean? If he's going to go down this path and you don't want to go down it, whether you're a girlfriend or your band member or Morris D-Bank from Felt or whoever, I don't care. He'll just keep going. And I think a lot of other artists who do have to compromise to be successful look at that model and think, God, I wish that was me.
Mm.
Do speaking of Morris D-Bank, and have you talked much with the former members of Felt, like guys who were in the band with him, and like what their thoughts or perspectives are on Felt's career and Lawrence?
Not at all. That was the interesting thing. So in doing the book, Lawrence, when we started, I said, first of all, you got to let me write this book. I'm not letting you, read it until I finish, because I knew it would just be a nightmare. And he said, okay, fine. Well, I've got some rules too. And he said some ridiculous rules. He said, I don't want you to use the word just. And I said, why not? He went, I just don't like it. Oh my God. You are crazy. And then he said, I don't want you speaking to other members of Felt. And I was like, well, why not? And he said, because it's all going to be, these different voices are going to be disagreeing with me, disagreeing with my version of events. And I thought, you know what, in this situation, and this is the beginning of the book, when obviously I wanted to get on one side, I thought, you're right, I'm not going to do a normal biography. I'm going to do a perspective of one guy and how he deals with life and how life deals with him. So, and I spoke to old girlfriends, but I didn't speak to former members of Felt. And also, it's worth bearing in mind that at the time of the book, and this is not a secret now, I think it's in the book actually, he was being sued by former members of Felt, even though they mistakenly thought, because there were a lot of reissues and, Acclaim now, but there's never really been any money in Felt. The bands have never, the albums never sold enough to really make money. So, and I know from being with Lawrence, he really doesn't have much, but there's a feeling, a bunch of guys from Felt, who probably annoyed that, must have been very difficult being in a band with Lawrence. And so that was going on at the same time. So I thought, no, it's okay, I'm not going to, but I'd like to speak to Morris D-Bank separately. I'd like to know what kind of a guy he was. Morris D-Bank, of course, he wasn't on this album. He was on the first 5, is it? Yeah. And amazing guitarist, but apparently completely different from Lawrence, completely different, not into alternative underground bands, didn't like people like Television or the Pistols, who Lawrence loved. He was a kind of progressive guy, a classical music guy, highly trained, very, very different, very serious. I do remember meeting Martin Duffy, who's the amazing Hammond organ is all over this album.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is such a defining part of the sound of this album. I mean, it is the remarkable part of this album.
Right from Reign of Crystal Spires, and the moment that starts, you get that amazing whirling 60s style, but very rich Hammond organ. It's just fantastic. And that's something I've noticed about Lawrence. Even though with Felt, even though he was a dictator, he'd tell them what to wear and he'd tell them what plectrums to use and he'd tell them what cars to drive. Failed, but he tried. Tell them not to drink, that was a big one, and they all just got completely pissed on the ferry over to their first European concert. He's always let them, once he finds a good musician, he lets them run. So if you listen to those earlier Felt albums with Morris D-Bank, the guitar solos just keep going. And if you listen to this album, Forever Breathes, you'll hear that Hammond organ just going off, and it's fantastic. And there's loads of instrumental tracks, not on this album, but on most of the Felt albums, in entire instrumental albums. where he just lets the band do their thing. So it's an interesting idea, really, that you have a control freak who's also happy to let these people do what they want to do. And that was my experience as a writer. Actually, all the things that any normal rock star would complain about, like when old girlfriends are saying what a terrible lover he was and all this kind of thing, he didn't mind.
Yeah.
And the things he objected to were just the tiny, like some absolutely minuscule, ridiculous little detail that we'd have massive fights over. So I think I can see what it would be like being in a band with Lawrence. It'd be sort of really satisfying on one level and very frustrating on the other.
Yeah, like Dan was saying earlier, I can't think of a good American analog to Lawrence. And I think part of the reason is because in the US, if you dedicated your life to being artistic monk or whatever, you'd be living under a bridge somewhere.
Yeah,
there's no health care or no safety net,
Yeah.
and so I don't know if we just can't really have a character quite like Lawrence here, or I mean I'm sure there's got to be somebody, but
Dan mentioned Daniel Johnson. I think it's a little different in the sense that Daniel Johnson's mental health is probably more severe.
Yeah.
Rocky Erickson, another one, mental health more severe, and they needed looking after. Lawrence is very eccentric, and he does find life difficult, but he can look after himself in his own small world. And you're right, he got what we call a council flat, so he pays very minimal rent. He got for a long time he got sickness benefit when he was dealing with serious health issues, and now he can live on just a little bit of money. And there's the other thing is that even though felt are still pretty obscure, it's interesting to see people are discovering them. Like in New York, I think, in LA, he's had offers to do felt in America. Of course, he won't do it, but he's had offers. And there's that band Girls who used to mention them a lot.
I saw a little interview that they did with Lawrence. They met him in a public park. And
you know why he did that? He did that because he thought the only reason he said yes to it is because he thought they were girls.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he thought I'm going to meet some nice American girls. He was really disappointed when he turned up.
It's a funny video because you can see how nervous they are. Like they're about to meet, somebody that they idolize and this reclusive, figure, and you can see how kind of tentative and nervous they are. But it's worth watching. It's a funny interview.
Yeah, so I think there is beginning to. Do you know a label called Light in the Attic?
Yeah.
Light in the Attic. So
they do a lot of reissues and stuff, right?
Exactly, a great label. And they do Lee Hazelwood, and they've done Velvet Underground albums and stuff. And they wanted to do something, but it just didn't happen. And so it's very. When it comes to the States, I think I can't see him playing in the States. He can manage to get to Europe and do some concerts and then come back. He hates being away for long. The famous one was when he made his band, this was Go-Kart Mozart a few years ago. He got an offer to play Japan, and the band was like, right, brilliant, we're going to Japan, it's going to be amazing. And from London to Japan is really far. It's it's more than LA. It's 14 hours or something. Anyway, they got there. Lawrence, said that he looked around the clothes shops of Japan, as he called them.
Yeah.
Did the gig, signed some records, and left the next day. And the band were furious because they didn't realize they'd been booked for this overnight stay. Where you go to the other side of the world. So that's going to stop you, But I think people are discovering him slowly. And streaming helps, Primitive Pain is such a beautiful song. I think it just needs to be used in some great American indie movie.
Yeah, that's what I keep thinking. Like somebody needs to put this over the credits of some hot show or hot whatever, and I think his fortunes could take off. But it seems like you're saying, like, you know, there was the documentary that was done about him 10 years ago or whatever, and now you've written the book about him, and it feels like something is percolating up. I mean, for us, you know, to be talking about him, you know, I feel like the felt renaissance is upon us, you know.
Well, you know, the thing is, it's not a hard album to listen to, isn't it? Is it? You know, if you, I've been listening like, since you asked me to do this, I've been going back to it, listening again and again. You know, it's a really great record.
Yeah,
It's not
Yeah.
like, but it's not like a kind of noise record or something which you've really got to challenge. You know, it's going to challenge you. It's melodic. Okay, he can't sing, but a lot of people can't sing, and they still
hmm
make it work. He's
Yeah.
got his own style. It's got great lyrics, as we talked about. And the songs are kind of short and snappy. You know, they're really good songs.
Yeah.
So
The
it's
album
not like
moves. It's an incredibly fast-moving album. I mean, the
always.
it's
Yeah.
it's like 39 minutes total,
yeah,
and
8
it, you know,
songs, boom.
really moves you through the record. I mean, it is not a slog at all, even for someone who,
Yes.
like me, came to it completely fresh.
That's completely true. You know, it's got all this, you know, kind of energy, a bit like the sort of the bit reminds me a bit of the Birds in a way. You know, this sort of
Yeah.
touch of that kind of light jangling but slightly mysterious quality. Um,
Or like
it's just a
13th floor elevators. I mean, it
yeah,
really kind of has that late
yeah, that drive.
60s, right? Like it takes off. You
Yeah,
put that album on, it takes off, and it's almost like you want a little break sometimes. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like take it down for one song. That was my
Well, that
impression.
yeah, definitely. I mean, 34, that first album is one of my favorite. 34 Elevators is one of my all-time favorite albums, and is there is something in there. It's definitely a quality in there. It's you know, it's not a hard sell. That's the thing.
Yeah.
But Lawrence is a hard sell because he won't do all the normal things. But you know, he's actually very he's he the thing about Lawrence is that unlike so many pop stars, he doesn't mind if he comes across as horrible. You know,
Yeah.
he's quite happy to. We did you know those shows like where you go on and you go on the radio and you have to rate people's records out of 10.
Yeah.
And normally, and they get people from bands and everything, and normally they tend to be quite nice because they don't want to,
Sure.
you know, alienate the other bands. Lawrence gave 0 to every single record. He just go, it's the worst thing I've ever heard. You know, and they're just like, this is even worse, it's terrible. You know,
I love it.
he
I
doesn't
love it.
care. Yeah, but actually, when it comes down to it, he's very sweet person, actually. You know, he's really can be really kind, and he's the big difference with Lawrence and a lot of people who I've interviewed who are much more famous is that he's really interested in other people. He wants to know, you know, if he met you guys, you go, oh, what's
Yeah.
that book out there? You know, he'd want to know what's happening behind you and what you're reading, and
Yeah.
what's going on in Hawaii. You know, he'd
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
fascinated. He really
Yeah.
wants to know.
So I have to ask, and this is a kind of a strange question, I guess, but as I read the book, he is, as you said, he's in a way, it doesn't feel as though you need to talk to the other band members because it appears as though he's quite candid and clear-eyed about how he can be difficult, right?
Oh
He
yeah,
expresses some of these very funny stories, at least in the book, in the first person, right? You know, I had to decide between how the drummer dressed and whether he could play. I can't remember if it was a drummer or a bass player, but like really interesting. And he kind of, in a very, you know, realistically self-aware way says it was a tough choice, but I had to pick
yes,
the latter, you know?
yeah.
And I think on some level he kind of understands that about himself. But the thing that I loved about the book and is a big question for me about him as kind of a character, is he a tragic character or is he kind of has he achieved the kind of perfect Lawrence that he wanted? Right? Should we feel sad for where he is, or is this really exactly where he intended to be?
Well, you could call him a hero because
Yeah.
this is someone who's never given up, and he's now 65,
Yeah.
and he just keeps going, and so that lack of compromise means that in a way he is where he wants to be, but there's a real sadness at the heart of Lawrence, and that is more than whether he made it or not. He says that he really struggles to just enjoy himself. He
Yeah.
can't go to a party. You'll never see him on the dance floor.
Mm,
He's too uptight. He can never. He said once he's got an inability to enjoy myself. That's how he put it.
yeah.
And it's like he always sees the fly in the ointment. So every time things are going well with a girlfriend or with an album, or with the book, the book's been far better received than I could ever hope for, considering it's an obscure subject. It's done well, and the response has been wonderful. Just everything the author could hope for. But even when it goes right, there's always something wrong. I mean, in the book, I remember this one. We were driving to a concert, and he was really happy because he had got a Radio 1, no, sorry, Radio 6 Music, which is our kind of alternative radio station. He got a whole session, and he was really, really pleased, and it was all going to be good. And then we were listening to it in the van on the way up, and it sounded great, and everyone was happy about it. And he's put his head in his hands afterwards, and he went, "It's a disaster." And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "The hissing sound, the hissing sound." I was like, "What hissing sound?" If you listen really carefully, you could hear it. I was like, nobody could hear it. But, according to him, it was, so it's like nothing could ever be right.
Yeah.
And I think in a way, it's quite an artistic thing in a sense, because you're like, well, if it's perfect, then I've done it. It's always waiting for, he's always finding the thing that's slightly wrong. So he can't, that's the sadness in a way, because whatever happens in his life, he can't really enjoy himself, and he's lonely, he knows that he's a lonely figure. He's resigned himself to never having another girlfriend. He's completely single. He has been for years. And he'll always say, "Oh, I've got no friends. I want a buddy." That's one of his "Oh, I want a buddy." He's always saying that. And they say, he'll say things like, "I just want someone to, pick up my clothes from the laundry, and, drive me places, and make sure I've brushed my teeth." It's like, you want a servant.
That's amazing.
So now for you, having written this book, and you spent the year with him, you obviously, I mean, he's been living rent free in your head now for however many years.
I paid the rent. I paid the rent on the thing.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, how? I mean, not only have you had to be so in his world and in his head for this amount of time, but now, like, it continues. Like, we're asking you questions. Like, you're on the tour circuit with him, and like, what kind of toll has that taken on you, I guess, is what I'm asking. Like, it's a great question. I really enjoy talking about him, and I really have a good time with Lawrence when I'm with him. He's brilliant in the talks. He's always brilliant. He's so funny. He always comes up with something which makes everyone laugh, and he's really charming. What's difficult is traveling with him. It's like traveling with your very fretful grandfather who just worries about everything. So we were doing a talk in Barcelona in Spain, and it was great that we'd been asked to do it. It was for the Spanish publication, and I was like, wow, this is going to be great. And my wife came, and it's going to be really nice. It's a few days in Barcelona. And on the way there at the airport, he went crazy because, when you go through, not customs, when you go through security, you have to take off your cap.
Yeah.
And he's famous for his baseball cap.
Yeah.
And he got so upset about this. And I said, "What does it matter? No one was there." And he said, "What about the fans?" I said, "What fans?" The fans might see me. I don't think you need to worry. So things like that drive me crazy. And he's always late, and it's really difficult moving him around from one place to another. But then it's like, it's a bit like your most difficult friend, and when they turn up, they're so brilliant that you forgive them for everything. So it's so hard to move him around, and he doesn't answer texts or anything. He can send texts, on his little phone, but he doesn't answer the phone for ages and all this stuff. And you're tearing your hair out. So, oh, we've got this big talk. What's going to happen? How am I going to get him there? All this kind of thing. And then, you get him in the car and he starts fussing about things the whole time. He tells you what he loves to do. Actually, this drives me crazy. When you're driving, he loves to give you directions when he doesn't know the way. And so he starts going, I think it's that way. I think it's that way. And you're going, shut up.
That's hilarious.
So he just drives you mad. But then, you get there and he's just fantastic.
Yeah.
So he's really, I was thinking about this the other day. What makes a charismatic person? There's something very charismatic about someone who is very different from the rest of us, but feels that they're right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it could be bad charisma. There could be dictators can be like that, but in his mind, he's so convinced of his way of doing things, and he doesn't compromise. It makes everyone around him work for it, but you end up respecting him for it because you just think this is a guy who's just truly on his own path.
Yeah.
So I'm fond of him. Yeah.
Will, thank you so much for coming in to chat with us. The book
it's lovely to talk to you guys.
The book was an absolute wonderful journey. I found it to be really insightful and a very fun read. It's a very funny book. I thought it was great. So it's called Street Level Superstar. Is there a particular place that you suggest people purchase it?
Well, at the moment, they're going to need to get it from the British publisher because I'm hoping that there will be a US publisher. There's been a French one, a Spanish one. So I'm hoping that there will be. But at the moment, they will need to get it from, well, I guess you can the best thing to do in the ideal world is order it from your local bookstore.
Yeah.
Because I love bookstores. And I think bookstores need supporting, and they will get it for you almost inevitably. It's very easy for them these days. Okay. Amazon doesn't really benefit anyone, so apart from Amazon. So if you can bear it, go to your local bookstore, order it, and get Lawrence's face, in that bookstore.
That would be the appropriate Lawrence way to get the book. You go to the bookstore. You get out.
Exactly. And he always says he's always talking about people buying his records. He doesn't talk about, streaming or anything like that. He knows it exists, but he's not bothered. He likes the physical world, and he likes, he's obsessed with the album sleeve as he is with the what's inside,
Right.
That's
Shanghai Design Company. Isn't that his
exactly, that's what he calls
moniker?
it.
Yeah.
Right, classic.
So definitely go out to your local bookstore, order the book, local record store, order the albums. And Will, our topic for this season was underrated but amazing albums worth a second look. Off the top of your head, is there one that you can recommend?
I can actually. There's an amazing album which I listened to a lot as a student, when I was at college, called Too Much Sleep by Bongwater. Do you know Bongwater?
Ann Magnuson. In college, I interviewed her. She went to the same small college as us, so I do happen to be it was Ann Magnuson and Kramer. Yeah,
he was the Galaxy 500 producer. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember that album being, in our college radio station and stuff, but I never took the time to investigate it. So that's a great pick.
Yeah.
It's a great record. It's the song Too Much Sleep is this beautifully dreamlike song. It's got lots of excerpts of people talking. There's this section with these three women sort of bitching about each other, and it's all cut together. It's a clever, funny, psychedelic album with lots of. Anne Magnuson is an actress, and so there's she's playing roles and characters in it. And Kramer's a bit of a Lawrence maybe, although he could run a whole record label, which I don't think Lawrence ever could. So, but there's a band called King Missile who are great, and Galaxy 500 was successful, and a few others. But I never hear people talking about Bongwater, and I'm really surprised because, everyone when they rediscover all these different bands, they become huge and people love them again. But Bongwater seems to have slipped through the cracks. And honestly, if you listen to Too Much Sleep, it's just a great record.
Great. All right, we'll put it in the show notes.
I'm definitely going to check that out now. Like that name has popped up so many times over the years, and I've never done it. So
it's good. It's really good.
Well,
right,
Will, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
It's been lovely to talk to you. I've been fantastic. And thanks so much for the thoughtful questions and the Lawrence love.
Yeah, and tell Lawrence we said hey.
I will. He'll love it. He'll go, what did they talk about? What are they saying about me?
Well, eventually you can play it for him. If he has
I will have to play it for him. I need to go around there with the laptop, but I can do it.
All right. Thanks, Will. Have a great day.
Have a good one, Will.
Thanks so much. You too.
Bye.
Take care.
Yep.
Bye.
Wow. All I can say is wow. What a gentleman. Will Hodgkinson. The book is Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence. It is terrific. Definitely go out and get it. It is the perfect way to get your PhD. Maybe not your PhD. Maybe it's just like an MFA in Lawrence. After backtracking, after our episodes, after backtracking the entire catalog, definitely read the book. Until next week, there's only a couple of things you need to do. You need to go to the Instagram. You need to follow us at Backtracking Rocks, Twitter at Backtracking Rocks, Reddit Backtracking Rocks, and of course, YouTube. Backtracking Rocks is the channel. The email address is backtrackingrocks@gmail.com. It's old school, but it works the best, so please use it. Once again, thanks to Will Hodgkinson. We have all of Will's social media links and every other kind of link that you might need. They're in the show notes. Check him out, follow him, and follow us. Next week, we're going to take on Gang of Youths. I don't know if you're ready. Bye-bye.
A good old-fashioned backtracking. Backtracking's the greatest podcast. F and JW and Dan with this podcast every week. Backtracking's the greatest podcast. Getting ready for podcast action.